Welcome back to Why Is That Dad? Unpacking the science, history, and culture of everyday questions for curious adults and kids. I'm your host, Phil, and today I've got my son Dominic with me. Dom, what do you got for us?
So I was at the grocery store with Mom, and she asked me to get some ketchup, or as Benny likes to say, some ketchup. Anyways, I put it in the cart. Mom picked it up, read the ingredients, and asked, "Can you get another one without high fructose corn syrup?" So I got the one with real sugar instead. She was happy about that. So what's up with this high fructose corn syrup? What is it? Why do people have something against it? Why is that, Dad?
That's such a good observation. And Dominic, you just stumbled upon an interesting story in modern food culture, which is how did we get so scared of specific ingredients? Because here's the thing, that ketchup Mom put back, there might be a completely valid reason to skip it, but high fructose corn syrup might not actually be the reason. And that's what today's episode is about.
So it's not that bad?
Well, that's exactly what we're going to dig into. Today's episode is called Demonized by Design, and we're going to look at a handful of foods and ingredients that have basically been put on trial by popular culture, found guilty in a court of public opinion, and we're going to ask, does the science actually back that up? We're talking about high fructose corn syrup, monosodium glutamate, seed oils, the whole soy gives you estrogen thing, and eggs.
Eggs? What's wrong with eggs?
Probably nothing. But eggs had maybe the most dramatic 50-year fall from grace and subsequent comeback in food history. We're getting there. But first, corn syrup. And before we even talk about whether it's bad, let's make sure we know exactly what it is. So, corn. It's a grain. It's a starch. And starch is basically a long chain of sugar molecules linked together, like a necklace made of sugar beads. Regular corn syrup is made by breaking that necklace apart with enzymes. You end up with a thick, sweetish liquid made mostly of glucose, which is the most basic fuel your body runs on.
So it's just corn turned into a liquid sugar?
Basically. Now, high fructose corn syrup takes that one step further. You run the glucose syrup through another enzyme process that converts some of the glucose into fructose, which is just a different kind of sugar, one naturally found in fruit. And it tastes sweeter than glucose. The most common version, called HFCS 55, ends up about 55% fructose and 45% glucose.
Okay, so there are two kinds of sugar in it. Why does that matter?
Well, here's where the myth busting starts. Regular table sugar, sucrose, the white stuff, is a molecule where one glucose and one fructose are chemically bonded together. Once it hits your small intestine, an enzyme called sucrase splits them apart. So your body ends up absorbing roughly 50% glucose and 50% fructose. Sound familiar?
That's almost the same ratio as the corn syrup.
Nearly identical, off by 5%. There is one small mechanical difference though. In sucrose, those sugars are bonded and need to be split first. In high fructose corn syrup, they're already free and separate, so they reach your liver slightly faster. But the metabolic destination is essentially the same. Your liver handles the fructose, your bloodstream handles the glucose, you get energy.
Then why does everybody act like high fructose corn syrup is poison?
Two reasons, timing and marketing. High fructose corn syrup started flooding American food in the 1980s. Cheaper than sugar, mixed easily into drinks, extended shelf life. It showed up everywhere. And right around the same time, obesity rates started climbing noticeably.
So people just assume that's the culprit?
Exactly. Two things happening at the same time looks like cause and effect. That's correlation. Correlation is not causation though. So when researchers tested high fructose corn syrup against regular sugar in controlled studies, where people didn't know which they were getting, they couldn't find meaningful differences in weight gain or health outcomes. The real story is that the total amount of sugar Americans consumed went way up. Portion sizes exploded, and processed food became the dietary backbone. High fructose corn syrup got singled out partly because the name sounds scary and technical, and partly because of
the marketing?
Yeah, the cane sugar industry had a financial interest in making high fructose corn syrup look bad. Some of the early alarming studies were funded by groups with skin in the game. That doesn't automatically discredit them, but it always is worth asking, who paid for this? And then food companies flipped it. They put no high fructose corn syrup on labels while just swapping in regular cane sugar instead.
So you're paying more for the exact same amount of sugar with the better PR?
In many cases, yes. Too much sugar of any kind is a legitimate health concern, but high fructose corn syrup isn't uniquely evil. It's just got better enemies.
Good. I like pouring the fake maple syrup on my pancakes. That's loaded with high fructose corn syrup. Okay, next food demon. What about monosodium glutamate? My friend's dad says Chinese restaurants use it and it gives you a headache.
MSG, or monosodium glutamate. Let's unpack that. Mono means one, sodium, same as is found in the table salt, and glutamate. That's a form of glutamic acid, an amino acid. Amino acids are the building blocks of protein. Every protein you've ever eaten, chicken, cheese, beans, breaks down into amino acids, and glutamate is one of the most abundant.
So it's something that's already in food naturally?
In enormous quantities. Aged Parmesan is loaded with natural glutamate. So are tomatoes, mushrooms, soy sauce, anchovies, walnuts.
Anchovies and walnuts? Those don't seem related at all.
They're not, except for this one thing: high natural glutamate content. And that matters because glutamate is what creates the deep, savory, satisfying taste the Japanese call umami. It's the fifth basic taste, alongside sweet, sour, salty, and bitter. MSG is just the purified, crystallized form of that same flavor compound. Think of it as taking the savory out of a mushroom and putting it in a shaker.
That sounds gross, actually. You know I hate mushrooms. Why do you have to sneak mushrooms into everything?
Because I'm a fun guy. Plus, mushrooms are awesome. Okay, have it your way. Swap the mushrooms for Parmesan in a shaker.
So putting Parmesan pasta is basically adding natural monosodium glutamate.
The glutamate molecule is chemically identical, and here's something that surprises most people. Almost none of the glutamate you eat actually reaches your brain. So, no headaches due to that. Your gut metabolizes most of it first. So the idea that it's flooding your nervous system when you eat takeout doesn't really hold up biologically.
Okay, so it isn't the glutamates. But how did Chinese food become the villain?
In 1968, a doctor named Robert Ho Man Kwok wrote a letter. Not a peer-reviewed study, just a letter to the New England Journal of Medicine. He said he sometimes felt odd after eating at Chinese restaurants and speculated it might be the MSG, or the sodium, or maybe just how much he'd eaten. He called it Chinese restaurant syndrome. Newspapers picked it up, and MSG became the villain.
From one letter?
Yep, one letter. And when researchers eventually ran proper double-blind studies, where nobody knew who got MSG and who got a placebo, people who claimed to be sensitive couldn't reliably detect it. When they thought they'd had MSG but hadn't, they reported symptoms. When they actually consumed it without knowing, they were fine.
So it was in their heads.
For the vast majority, yes. The FDA classifies MSG as generally recognized as safe. And here's the irony. Restaurants advertising no MSG are often cooking with Parmesan, fish sauce, and soy sauce, all dense with natural glutamate. Your tongue cannot tell the difference. There's also an uncomfortable racial angle here. Italian food, drenched in tomatoes and Parmesan, never got the same suspicion as Chinese food. That asymmetry is worth noticing.
Yeah, that does seem unfair when you say it like that.
Once a food fear gets into culture, it's very hard to dislodge. It gives people something concrete to avoid, something to feel in control of, even when the science doesn't back it up.
Okay, the next one is a recent phenomenon. What about seed oils? People online seem really mad about them lately.
Seed oils are the newest entry in the Food Villain Hall of Fame, and I want to be upfront. This one is the most genuinely contested of everything we're covering today. So let's build from the ground up. Seed oils are oils extracted from seeds or grains. Soybean oil comes from soybeans, corn oil comes from corn kernels, sunflower oil comes from sunflower seeds, and canola oil comes from...
Let me guess. The canola plant.
No, actually, it comes from the rapeseed plant.
The what plant?
Rapeseed. It's a bright yellow flowering plant, part of the mustard family, been cultivated in Europe and Asia for centuries.
So why don't they just call it rapeseed oil?
Well, they did for a long time. But in the 1970s, Canadian agricultural scientists bred a new low-acid variety of the plant specifically for food use, and they needed to market it. Rapeseed oil was not exactly flying off the shelves.
Gee, Dad, I can't imagine why.
Hard to imagine. So they coined a new name, canola. It stands for Canadian Oil Low Acid. It's essentially a marketing name for a new, improved variety of rapeseed oil, which means canola oil is technically a real thing. It's just that the plant it came from has a name nobody wanted on the label.
So the whole name exists because rapeseed sounds bad.
Pretty much. And honestly, given everything we're talking about today, that might make it the most honest food rebranding story of the 20th century. They changed the name because the original one scared people off, which is exactly what we're talking about this whole episode, just in reverse.
So food names can make things seem scarier than they are, or less scary than they are.
The name is doing a lot of work either way. Anyways, to the actual chemistry. To get the oil out at industrial scale, you typically press the seeds and then use a chemical solvent called hexane to extract the remaining oil, followed by refining and deodorizing.
A chemical solvent? That sounds kind of sketchy.
It sounds alarming, but the hexane is almost entirely removed during refining. The trace amounts left behind are well within limits that regulators consider safe, if you trust them. And cold-pressed seed oils skip the hexane steps entirely, if that matters to you. They just cost more. Anyway, the concern about seed oils isn't really about the extraction. It's about the type of fat they contain. Think of a fat molecule as a chain. A saturated fat chain is perfectly straight. Every link is fully loaded with hydrogen atoms. That's why butter and lard are solid at room temperature. Straight chains stacked together nicely. An unsaturated fat has at least one double bond in the chain, which puts a kink in it, like a bendy straw with a bend in it. Because of that kink, they can't stack neatly, so they stay liquid at room temperature.
Butter is straight straws stacking neatly in a box. Oil is bent straws sliding everywhere.
Pretty useful analogy. And the seed oils are high in specific type of unsaturated fat called omega-6 fatty acids. And your body needs omega-6. The issue is a ratio to omega-3, which is the other major unsaturated fat. Historically, humans ate them in roughly a 4-to-1 ratio, omega-6 to omega-3. Today, because seed oils are in nearly every processed food, the average American's diet is somewhere around 15 or 20 to 1.
That's a big shift.
It's real and documented. But here's where people oversimplify it. Some say omega-6 is pro-inflammatory and omega-3 is anti-inflammatory, like they're simple opposites. The reality is more nuanced. Some breakdown products of omega-6 can contribute to inflammation, but linoleic acid, the main omega-6 in most seed oils, doesn't strongly raise inflammatory markers in controlled human trials. Multiple studies have looked at this directly and didn't find the effect people expect.
So the inflammation story is overblown?
The simplified version is, here's what the anti-seed oil crowd gets right. Our ratio has shifted dramatically, and that probably matters in ways we don't fully understand yet. Here's what they often get wrong. Swapping butter for vegetable oils consistently lowers LDL cholesterol in clinical trials. That's a real reproducible finding. And to be fully honest, a couple of older trials reanalyzed recently, the Sydney Diet Heart Study, the Minnesota Coronary Experiment, found that replacing saturated fat with omega-6 rich oils didn't help heart outcomes in those specific groups, and in one case might have hurt. That's real published science, and it's why this debate isn't settled.
So what's the actual answer?
The boring truth is probably don't deep fry everything in the same seed oil repeatedly, but a salad with canola dressing isn't slowly killing you. This is one where the fear is running ahead of the evidence, but the evidence isn't completely in yet either.
I kind of respect that you're not just saying it's fine.
It's called nuance, and it's worth knowing that seed oils have become a pretty hot political topic recently, not just an internet one. Robert F. Kennedy Jr., when he was heading up health policy, made seed oils one of his main targets, called them a key driver of chronic disease in America.
So it went from a YouTube thing to like actual government policy?
It did. And look, the underlying concern about ultra-processed food in the American diet, that part is legitimate and worth taking seriously regardless of who's saying it. But the specific claim that seed oils are uniquely toxic runs ahead of what the controlled science actually shows right now. It's a case of real concern. Our diet has changed dramatically, getting attached to a specific culprit that the evidence doesn't fully support yet.
So the worry is right, but the target might be off?
That's a fair way to put it. And it's a good reminder that the same questions apply to everyone making claims. Authority, politicians, podcasters, or me, your dad. Who's funding the research? What does a controlled science actually say? What's the dose? And compared to what?
The questions work on everyone.
They make you a critical thinker.
Okay, next. Soy. My friend said it turns you into a girl.
Confidently incorrect. But this is why I said that. Soy contains compounds called phytoestrogens. Phyto is Greek for plant. They have a molecular structure that loosely resembles estrogen. Specific ones in soy are called isoflavones. Genistein and dietary are the main players. And yes, they can bind to estrogen receptors, basically docking stations on your cells shaped to receive the specific molecules.
So they do something estrogen-like?
They can dock there, but they're a much weaker signal. Think of a key that fits in the lock but barely turns it, and it's tissue dependent. In some tissues, like breast tissue, isoflavones can act as a very weak estrogens. In others, they can mildly block estrogen from docking. So the body doesn't experience it as a blast of estrogen. It's a mixed context-dependent signal.
And that's not enough to actually change anything.
Not at normal dietary amounts. Not a single well-designed study shows that regular soy intake feminizes men or measurably changes testosterone levels. Japanese and East Asian populations have eaten significant amounts of soy for centuries. Tofu, miso, edamame, and there's no hormonal epidemic in those populations.
So guys who drink soy milk are completely fine?
Completely fine. And here's the thing. Soy isn't even close to the biggest source of phytoestrogens in the food supply. Flaxseed has up to 800 times more. Hops, the plant that makes beer bitter, contains some of the most potent plant estrogens known. The phytoestrogen in hops is 50 times stronger than the one found in soy. Broccoli has them, whole grains have them, garlic has them, dried apricots have them. Granted, a glass of soy milk has a concentrated amount, but soy isn't unique.
So the guy avoiding soy milk but eating a clean salad with flaxseed dressing and drinking a beer afterward
is consuming phytoestrogens 3 different ways and blaming the one food they got the bad press.
That's so funny.
It really is. Soy became the symbol for something that's just quietly present throughout the plant kingdom, which tells you a lot about how food fear actually works. It's not really about the chemistry, it's about which food got the story written about it first.
Okay, you said eggs had the most dramatic story. What happened to eggs?
Eggs might be the single greatest example of official nutrition science getting something badly wrong for 50 years and then having to quietly walk it back. So let's start with what an egg actually is nutritionally, because once you understand that, the story of how we got scared of them is even more baffling.
What's in an egg?
Egg is a chicken gamete if it's not fertilized, an undeveloped chicken embryo if it is, which is a weird thing to say, but it's true. A large egg has about 6 grams of complete protein, meaning it contains all 9 essential amino acids your body can't make on its own. It has vitamins A, D, E, K, B12, selenium, folate, iron. It's one of the best dietary sources of choline, a nutrient that about 90% of Americans don't get enough of, and which is critical for brain development, memory, and liver function. And the yolk contains lutein and zeaxanthin, 2 antioxidants that accumulate in your retina and act like built-in sunglasses against blue light damage.
That's a lot of stuff in one egg.
All for about 70 calories. Nutritionists sometimes call it one of the most nutrient-dense foods per calorie on the planet. And egg protein is so high quality it's literally used as the gold standard by which all other proteins are measured.
So why did people stop eating them?
Before we get there, I feel like we need a moment of appreciation. Because you and I both know there is at least one prominent cultural figure who understood the power of eggs long before any nutritionist did.
Ha! Gaston.
Gaston.
When I was a lad, I ate 4 dozen eggs every morning to help me get large.
And now that I'm grown, I eat 5 dozen eggs, and I'm roughly the size of a barge.
He was basically doing ancestral nutrition before it was cool.
He really was. Gaston, for all his many many flaws, was not wrong about eggs. 6 grams of complete protein, all 9 essential amino acids, every fat-soluble vitamin. If you actually wanted to build someone to the size of a barge, eggs are generally not a bad place to start.
So Gaston was ahead of the science.
Gaston was ahead of the guidelines, which, as we're about to see, is not the same thing as being ahead of the science.
So what went wrong? Why did people stop eating them?
Cholesterol. Eggs, specifically egg yolks, are high in dietary cholesterol. One large egg has about 186 milligrams. And starting in 1968, the American Heart Association announced that everyone should consume less than 300 milligrams of dietary cholesterol per day, which worked out to a strict limit of about 3 egg yolks per week. Then, in 1977, the federal dietary guidelines reinforced this. Eggs were essentially put on a national health blacklist.
But why? What's wrong with cholesterol?
Okay, here's the chemistry. And this is the key to the whole thing. Cholesterol is a waxy, fat-like molecule your body actually makes, mostly in your liver. It's essential. You need it to build cell membranes, produce hormones, and make bile for digestion. The concern was that high levels of cholesterol in your blood, particularly LDL, which people call bad cholesterol, are associated with heart disease risk. And people assumed that if you ate cholesterol, it would raise the cholesterol in your blood.
That seems like a reasonable thing to assume.
It seems logical. Eat more cholesterol, have more cholesterol. But here's what the body actually does. And this is the part that changes everything. Your liver has a feedback regulation system. When you eat more cholesterol from food, your liver senses the incoming supply and dials back its own production. When you eat less cholesterol, it ramps production back up. It's like a thermostat. Your liver produces up to 85% of the cholesterol in your bloodstream. Dietary cholesterol from food is a relatively small input that the body quietly compensates for.
So eating cholesterol doesn't really change how much cholesterol you have?
For most people, the effect is surprisingly small. In controlled feeding studies, adding 1 egg per day changes blood cholesterol by something like 2 to 3%. And here's what's really happening. It tends to raise both LDL and HDL simultaneously. HDL, the so-called good cholesterol that helps clear LDL from your arteries. So even the small effect dietary cholesterol does have isn't cleanly negative.
So the whole thing was based on a misunderstanding of how the body works?
An oversimplified model, yes. And here's the kicker. Even Ansel Keys, the researcher whose work formed much of the basis for the cholesterol concerns in the first place, wrote as early as 1965 that dietary cholesterol accomplishes little in actually controlling blood cholesterol levels. The man whose research triggered the panic knew the dietary cholesterol piece specifically wasn't the main lever.
Wait, the guy who started all this said it didn't work?
He said dietary cholesterol specifically wasn't the key factor. Saturated fat, the kind in butter and fatty meat, actually does raise LDL more meaningfully than dietary cholesterol does. That's an important distinction that got completely lost in the egg panic. Everything got lumped together under fat is bad, cholesterol is bad, eggs are bad. And the nuance vanished.
So the wrong thing got blamed?
Yes, and the consequences were real. Egg consumption in America dropped significantly after 1968. People who had eaten eggs for breakfast their whole lives, affordable, fast, extraordinarily nutritious, cut them out or switched to egg white only omelets, throwing away the yolk where almost all the nutrition actually lives.
Wait, the nutrition is mostly in the yolk?
Almost all of it. The yolk has virtually all the vitamins, all the choline, all the lutein, all the fat-soluble nutrients. The white is mostly protein and water. So people were discarding the most nutritious part of a food they'd already decided was too dangerous to eat. It's almost poetic in how completely wrong it went.
When did they finally figure it out?
It took until 2015, nearly 50 years after the original 1968 guidelines, for the Dietary Guidelines Advisory Committee to remove dietary cholesterol from the list of nutrients of public health concern. In 2016, the specific daily limit of 300 milligrams was quietly dropped. The American Heart Association now says healthy adults can safely eat 1 to 2 eggs a day. Meta-analyses pooling data from the hundreds of thousands of people found no meaningful relationship between egg intake and heart disease or stroke in healthy adults.
50 years. That's actually kind of infuriating.
It is, and I want to sit with that for a second because it connects to something real that a lot of people are feeling right now. One of the big reasons there's so much distrust of nutritionists, doctors, and health institutions today, not just about food, but about health advice generally, is exactly this. People watched official institutions tell them with complete confidence for 50 years that eggs were dangerous. And then those same institutions quietly updated the guidelines and moved on.
And nobody really apologized.
Nobody really apologized. And if you're a regular person who gave up eggs for 30 years because you trusted the experts, and then you find out those experts were working from a flawed model that was partly shaped by industry money, you're going to be skeptical the next time those same institutions tell you something. That's not irrational. That's a reasonable response to being burned.
So the distrust makes sense.
It makes sense. The problem is what people do with that distrust. Some people respond by developing better critical thinking, which is what I'm trying to show you. Learning to ask sharper questions, demand better evidence, notice who's funding what. That's healthy skepticism. Other people swing in the opposite extreme and decide that all expert advice is corrupt and that contrarians on the internet are more trustworthy than scientists. That's not healthy either. It just replaces one bad information source with another, often a worse one.
So it's like distrust the institution, but don't throw out the whole idea of evidence.
Perfectly put. The goal isn't blind trust and it isn't total rejection. It's getting better at evaluating claims, which is exactly what we've been doing this whole episode. And that's why this stuff matters for you. Not just so you can eat eggs without guilt, but so you know how to think about the next claim that comes along. Because there will always be a next claim.
You keep mentioning industries funding studies to make their ingredients look better. Has that actually been proven with real documents?
This is a rabbit hole, and you walked right into it. Yes, definitively, documentably, scandalously, yes. In 2016, a paper was published in JAMA, Internal Medicine, one of the most prestigious medical journals in the world. Researchers had dug through historical archives and found internal documents from the Sugar Research Foundation, the lobbying arm of the American sugar industry in the 1960s.
What did they find?
In 1965, the Sugar Research Foundation secretly funded 3 Harvard scientists to publish a review of research on fat, sugar, and heart disease. Paid the equivalent of about $50,000 in today's money, the resulting paper appeared in the New England Journal of Medicine. No funding disclosure, Harvard letterhead, and it downplayed sugar's role in heart disease while pointing the finger squarely at fat.
And people believed it because it was Harvard.
Harvard plus the New England Journal of Medicine. That's about as credentialed as it gets. And one of those scientists later became the head of nutrition at the USDA, the agency that writes the federal dietary guidelines. The guidelines that told America to cut fat, cut cholesterol, and eat fewer eggs.
So the person who helped to bury the sugar evidence ended up writing the national rules for what everyone eats?
That's what the historical record shows. And those guidelines shape school lunches, hospital dietary recommendations, food labeling, and what food companies marketed as healthy for the next 50 years.
Why didn't scientists catch it sooner? Why is that, Dad?
Nutritional science is genuinely hard in ways that are easy to underestimate. People misremember what they ate yesterday. Multiply that uncertainty by decades of dietary studies and you see the problems. You can't lock people in a lab and control every meal for 30 years. And once ideas get embedded in official guidelines, they develop enormous institutional momentum. Agencies don't like publicly reversing course because it shakes public trust. Once something gets into a textbook, it can take 20 years to get it out, which is why your grandparents, your parents, maybe even some doctors still think eggs are a heart disease risk. They're not wrong, they're just running on old operating systems.
That's a generous way to put it.
It's the fair way. Scientists aren't villains. The system has real structural problems, and industry manipulation made those problems worse. Those are different things worth keeping separate. There's something worth zooming out on here, because this isn't just a science story. Food fear has become its own cultural and economic force.
What do you mean?
Look at a grocery store. Gluten-free, no artificial colors, non-GMO, keto-friendly, all natural. These labels generate billions in premium pricing every year. People buy them because they want to be responsible, to protect their families. That instinct is genuinely good. But when fear gets disconnected from evidence, you end up paying extra for the marketing, not the health benefits.
Like the high fructose corn syrup thing. You just pay more for the same amount of sugar.
Exactly. And natural on a food label is so loosely regulated, it's practically meaningless. Arsenic is natural. Botulinum toxin is natural. Naturalness and safety are not the same thing.
Is worrying about food all the time actually bad for you?
There's a real condition called orthorexia, an unhealthy obsession with eating correctly, and it can become its own psychological disorder. And there's genuine research showing that chronic food anxiety affects quality of life. So the fear itself carries a real cost. There's also a social dimension. The ability to shop selectively, to always buy the clean version of things, is a privilege not everyone has. When food moralizing gets intense, it often lands hardest on people who are already stretched thin.
That seems unfair on top of everything else.
It is, and from a faith perspective, we're Catholic, and food has always been central to religious life. Shared meals, fasting, the Eucharist itself. There's something important about not letting food become a source of shame or anxiety, while still being a good steward of the body we've been given. The virtue here is prudence, moderation informed by wisdom, not panic.
Not fear, but not recklessness either.
Exactly right.
So, what's the actual takeaway from all of this?
Here's a framework. 4 questions. When someone tells you a specific ingredient is dangerous, ask, first, compared to what? Is it actually worse than what replaces it? Second, at what dose? Water kills you if you drink 10 gallons of it. Dose is everything. Third, who funded the research? Industry money doesn't automatically discredit a study, but it's information worth having. And fourth, is this a genuine scientific consensus or a loud internet opinion?
Those are actually useful questions.
And none of this means eat whatever you want. A diet built mostly on whole foods, plenty of plants, reasonable protein, not too much added sugar, some eggs in the morning, is still what the broad evidence supports. We're not saying food quality doesn't matter. We're saying be scared of the right things, not the marketing manufactured things.
And eat your egg yolks.
Eat your egg yolks, please. They've been through enough.
Okay, trivia time. Question 1. In what year did the American Heart Association first announce its recommendation limiting egg yolk consumption to no more than 3 per week? Question 2. Your liver produces roughly what percentage of cholesterol in your bloodstream? Is it 20%, 50%, or up to 85%? In question 3, eggs are one of the best dietary sources of what nutrient that roughly 90% of Americans don't get enough of, which is critical for brain development and memory. If you learned something today, please leave us a 5-star review wherever you listen to podcasts. It helps some more curious families find the show, and Dad checks the reviews way more than he'd like to admit. Remember, just because something sounds scary on a label doesn't mean the science agrees. And eat the whole egg.
I'm Phil, he's Dominic, and this has been Why's That Dad? We'll see you next time.
Bye.
God bless.